My name is Grace, and I used to think I had it all figured out. A great job as head of marketing, a loving husband named Mark, a comfortable life, paying off our mortgage with my own salary, and a family that played a big part in our lives. Mark had a younger brother named Tom, and their mom, Linda, was always around. Their dad had passed away years ago, so the boys made it a point to take care of her. I found it touching because it made me love Mark even more when I saw how he cared for his family. At first, we would talk over coffee during family get-togethers, and she seemed to like me enough. She would ask about my work marketing, and I would respond, "Yeah, that sounds important." It felt good to have her approval. Fit in with Mark's family to be a part of their close-knit group. Our first few years of marriage were full of weekend barbecues, holiday dinners, and spontaneous get-togethers with the extended family. I recall one Thanksgiving when we were all crowded around Linda's dining table, laughing and talking over each other. Mark's uncle yelled from the end of the table, "Pass the gravy, will you?" Linda shot back, but she was grinning as she handed over the boat. I looked around the table, taking in the familiar faces, feeling like this was my family now. The first crack appeared during a party at Linda's house on New Year's Eve. I was in the kitchen refilling my glass of wine when I heard Linda talking to Mark and Tom in the living room. "Did you notice what Carol was wearing?" Linda snickered. "That dress must have cost all of $5. I froze my hand on the bottle. This wasn't the friendly, welcoming family I thought I knew. I peeked around the corner and watched as Linda leaned in conspiratorially to her sons, all three of them giggling like school children. As time passed, I couldn't ignore the growing unease I felt around Linda, which I had initially dismissed as harmless teasing, but it turned out to be much meaner. It wasn't just Carol who was in her crosshairs. At every family gathering, Linda would huddle with Mark and Tom, their heads close together as they whispered and snickered, their eyes darting around the room, landing on various relatives and friends before they burst into muffled laughter one Easter Sunday. I couldn't stand it any longer. Linda was holding court in the living room, and Mark and Tom were standing there like obedient subjects. Did you notice that Linda was talking in a low but not low enough voice, and that she probably bought it from the buy here, pay here lot? I bet she'll be paying it off until she's 80 before I realize what I was doing. The room fell silent, and Linda's eyes narrowed as she looked up at me. Her voice was full of sarcasm, and it seemed like "We've offended your delicate sensibilities." Mark and Tom exchanged awkward looks, and I thought it was rude. "Why do you always have to put people down?" Linda's fake smile vanished, "And if you don't like it, you don't have to listen." "Why don't you go?" Felt like I'd been slapped. I looked at Mark, expecting him to support me, but he just stared at the floor. I said, "Fine," and he remained by his mother's side like glue. One night after a particularly bad dinner, Mark sighed and ran a hand through his hair. I asked him, "Why don't you ever stand up to her?" He would occasionally give me apologetic glances, but he never came to sit with me. I asked him, "What do you want me to do?" "She's my mother, Grace." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "She's being cruel." I wanted him to tell her that I wanted you to have my back, but he never did. Gradually, I began looking for excuses not to attend these family events. Work emergencies, migraines, or anything to avoid the cold stares and whispered insults. Then, just when I thought things couldn't get any more complicated, life threw me another curveball. I was pregnant. My heart was pounding in the bathroom, and I had 2 pink lines visible as day. "Mark." I called out to him shakily, "Can you come here?" His eyes widened as he took the test from me, and for a brief moment, I thought that maybe everything would be all right, that maybe this baby would heal the rifts that had been growing between us. However, life had other plans. The pregnancy had been difficult from the beginning, with constant nausea, dizziness, and a constant fear of miscarriage keeping me on edge. My doctor placed me on bed rest, which meant that I had to work remotely. As the weeks passed, my condition worsened, and my eyesight began to deteriorate rapidly, a rare complication that my doctor said could be temporary but might also be permanent, making it impossible to squint at my laptop. With a heavy heart, I had to quit my job because I needed Mark more than ever, but he seemed to be drifting away. The day of my C-section came sooner than I had anticipated, and I would usually fall asleep by myself until the sound of the front door closing jolted me awake in the middle of the night. My eyesight had gotten so bad that the doctors insisted on the procedure because a natural birth was just too risky. As I lay on the old operating table, my heart raced with a mixture of excitement and fear. I asked the nurse, my voice shaking, and she gave me a sympathetic smile. "Your husband in the waiting room, dear, said he'd rather stay there." The surgery went well, and soon I heard the most beautiful sound, my son's first cry, when they placed him on my chest. Later, in the recovery room, Mark finally appeared, and I was overcome with love. I think it's not right. I blinked in confusion, and he ran a hand through his hair. His words hit me like a punch to the gut, saying, "Mark, I couldn't risk saving it." He cut me off. "I'm heading home. This place gives me the creeps." The next few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and endless feedings. Mark was rarely home, and when he was, he didn't do anything to help with our son's care. Instead, he would complain nonstop, "Can't you shut him up?" and growl as our baby cried in the middle of the night. I'm trying. But I'd say that exhaustion was weighing heavily on me. "He's teething, Mark, and it hurts him. All you do is focus on the kid. What about me?" As the weeks stretched into months, Mark's dissatisfaction grew. One evening, while I was trying to calm our fussy 6-month-old, he dropped a bombshell. "You need to go back to work." I turned to face him in shock, but he interrupted saying, "What about the baby? We'll hire a nanny." I wanted to argue that I wasn't ready, but the determined look in his eyes told me it was pointless. So I started job hunting with a heavy heart. Finding work with my compromised vision wasn't easy, but I eventually landed a position at a smaller company, but the pay was less than what I'd earned before. When I told Mark, his reaction was predictably negative, and that's it. He scoffed at us paying a nanny for this. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. "I'm trying my best, Mark," he muttered as he walked away. This was the beginning of my new reality, which was hurrying to work every morning, feeling guilty as I left my baby with the nanny, struggling through the day with my limited vision, and coming home to a resentful husband and a child who needed me. Before I knew it, 2 years had passed since the birth of my son. Despite the difficulties, I loved him deeply and found joy in every milestone. But family gatherings continued to be a source of stress, especially because of Linda's behavior. She would pretend to be the devoted grandmother for show, but her face would darken with anger. Telling him about me, she would hiss, "You're turning my own grandson against me." I tried to explain that I was tired, but he simply didn't know me well. Then, one typical Tuesday morning, my world turned upside down again, and I stared at the pregnancy test in my hand, my heart pounding, and I was afraid that I was pregnant again. My first pregnancy had been so difficult, and my health was so compromised, so I wondered if I could handle another one. But as I calculated the weeks, I realized that the decision had been made for me with shaking hands. I called Mark at work. "What is it?" He answered impatiently, "I'm pregnant." There was a long pause, and then, "Look, Grace, I'm busy. We'll talk later, but don't quit your job, all right? Or we can't afford that." I sat there with my phone in hand, feeling more alone than ever. Fortunately, this pregnancy was easier than my first. My morning sickness was under control, and my vision remained stable. I kept working, determined to support my expanding family, but as my belly grew, Mark spent more and more time at his mother's house. One evening, as I was struggling to put our son to bed while juggling my swollen belly, he said, "Hey, I'm tired. Can you read him a story?" He looked at us, and as the door closed behind him, I felt a tear roll down my cheek. I looked at my son. His large eyes were looking up at me with trust, and at my rounded belly, home to a child I already loved fiercely. As my 7th month of pregnancy rolled around, I discovered I was getting ready for Thanksgiving when my parents arrived early in the afternoon. My mom immediately rolled up her sleeves to help in the kitchen, and friends and family trickled in, filling our home with laughter and conversation. Just as I was about to serve dinner, the doorbell rang, and to everyone's surprise, Tom, Mark's younger brother, was with a woman. The room fell silent for a moment before erupting in congratulations, and I forced a smile on my face, trying to ignore the twinge of jealousy at the way Mark's eyes lit up at the sight of his brother's happiness. Linda arrived soon after, her eyes widening as she took in Melissa, and she said, "Aren't you a sight for sore eyes?" Throughout dinner, focus on being a good hostess. But I couldn't help but overhear their conversation. So Linda said, loudly so that everyone could hear Tom say, "You're a manager at National Bank." "How prestigious," Melissa nodded, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Yes, I've been there for about 5 years now." Linda beamed. "You must be doing very well for yourself, unlike some people who can only pop out babies and breed poverty." I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment, and my mother tense next to me, ready to say something, but I put a hand on her arm and silently begged her not to make a scene. "You know, sweet Melissa here makes $155,000 a month. That's the kind of intelligent, beautiful, and successful daughter-in-law I've always dreamed of. All of that seemed to have been forgotten, so I think we should go somewhere more appropriate for this lovely evening. Linda said, standing up, Melissa, why don't we all go to that new restaurant downtown? Before I could comprehend what was happening, Linda, Tom, and Melissa were leaving. Mark didn't even look back at me as they did so. The rest of the guests were shifting uncomfortably in their seats, and the festive mood was completely ruined. One by one, they offered to help me clean up, but I declined, stating that they needed to rest. Hours passed while I sobbed, my hand resting on my swollen belly, wondering how my life had come to this point. It was almost dawn when I heard the front door open, and Mark stumbled in, waking. He walked to the bedroom with trembling hands and no words. I grabbed my phone and went to social media, where I saw Linda, Mark, Tom, and Melissa smiling for selfies at a fancy nightclub. The caption said, "Best Thanksgiving ever with my real family." As my due date drew near, I felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. The doctors had scheduled my C-section, insisting that it was the safest option because it had been less than 3 years since my last one. I tried to concentrate on getting ready for our new arrival, but I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something wasn't right with Mark. Mark shrugged, barely meeting my eyes, and I thought I'd update my wardrobe because it didn't make sense. But I ignored my suspicions because the impending birth was taking up my mind. 3 days before my scheduled C-section chaos broke out, I had been carefully saving money in a separate account, determined to take a couple of months off work to recover and bond with our new baby. My workplace had approved 2 months of unpaid leave, which was a relief. I had also set aside enough money for a babysitter for our 3-year-old. I was resting on the couch when Mark burst through the door, and Linda was hot on his heels. "Hurry up," Linda barked, and Mark rushed to our bedroom. I struggled to my feet, waddling after them, and Mark was throwing clothes into a suitcase. I said, rising with panic. "What are you doing?" He barely looked at me. "Tom's getting married in Hawaii, so we're all going. But my C-section is in 3 days, so who will look after our son?" Before I could reply, he brushed past me, Linda ushering him out the door. The door slammed, leaving me in stunned silence as reality hit me like a tidal wave. I fumbled for my phone, my hand shaking as I checked our joint account, and all the money I had saved was gone with trembling fingers. I dialed Mark's number and he answered on the last ring, which is when he snapped the money, and I choked out, "All our savings, where is it?" There was a pause, followed by a cold laugh. The line went dead, and I looked down in horror to see a puddle forming at my feet. My water had broken. Panic struck me. I couldn't go into labor now, and the risk to my previous C-section scar was too great. I called emergency services, and the hospital was in chaos, with one hand on my belly and the other clutching my phone. Hours later, I awoke to the soft beep of monitors, and my mother's tear-streaked face came into view. Grace whispered, "You're okay, the baby's okay," and squeezed my hand. 3 days after the emergency cesarean section, I was feeling surprisingly strong, both physically and emotionally. The doctors gave me the all-clear to return home, and I called my parents to ask if I could stay with them for a while. Mark hadn't called since he left for Hawaii, not to check on me or inquire about his new son, so I knew our marriage was over. Their response was prompt and encouraging, and I began looking up divorce attorneys and gathering financial records. And precisely 1 week after I had left the hospital, my phone rang, and Mark's name appeared, flashed on the screen, and I let it go to voicemail twice before answering on the 3rd call. Mark's voice was a mix of confusion and anger, and I took a deep breath. I met my parents, Mark, and both of our sons. I filed for divorce. There was a moment of stunned silence, followed by a bark of laughter. "Divorce? Are you kidding me after everything I've done for you?" I thought, "You mean like abandoning me right before I gave birth or stealing all our savings?" He said, "I'll pay you back, no problem. In fact, I don't even want to see you, again because I'm going to be rich." He then went into a tirade about how Tom's new wife had offered him a job as her deputy at the bank, and how they were going to start their own financial company, and how she was going to make them all rich, beyond their wildest dreams. "You never believed in me, Grace." The divorce proceedings proceeded swiftly, and to my surprise, Mark didn't dispute anything. He returned the money he had taken from our accounts and agreed to pay alimony. When it came to the house, I had years' worth of mortgage statements proving I had been the one making payments, and the judge awarded it to me without hesitation. On the day I returned home with the boys, Mark was there packing up the last of his belongings. He sneered as I walked in with the baby in my arms and our toddler holding my hand, saying, Enjoy this dump while you can." He hefted a box, saying, "I'll be in a mansion soon swimming in cash. You'll see what you missed out on." As he left, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders and the house suddenly felt brighter. A year and a half had passed since the divorce proceedings. After my divorce, my life had returned to normal for me and my boys. It wasn't always easy, but we were happy, healthy, and thriving. One typical Tuesday, my phone buzzed with a news alert, and as I read the headline, I was shocked to learn that a local banker had been exposed as a fraud and left the family in ruins. The article described a shocking scandal in which Melissa Tom's wife had been running a complex scam in which she had persuaded Mark Tom and Linda to take out large loans to fund a non-existent financial company. She had even mortgaged Linda's house, investing all of their money in this fictitious venture. Melissa wasn't a banker at all. The office she had shown them was a short-term rental, and as part of her elaborate scheme, she vanished with millions of dollars, leaving behind a trail of forged documents and broken dreams. To make matters worse, I found that they had taken out a second loan to fund Tom and Melissa's extravagant Hawaiian wedding, the very event for which Mark had abandoned us. I read about it with a mixture of emotions, including shock, confusion, and, I'll admit, a slight sense of relief. The consequences were severe. They lost everything, including Linda's house, cars, and personal belongings, all of which were seized by creditors, leaving them with nothing but mountains of debt. I learned through rumors that Linda had to work as a cashier to pay for a small apartment and groceries. Mark and Tom were in similar circumstances. Their dreams of success and wealth were dashed. I was extremely thankful that I had divorced Mark when I did, and my children were safe and unaffected by the financial catastrophe that had befallen my ex-husband's family. Just when I thought I had moved on, my phone rang, and against my better judgment, I answered Grace Linda's voice. I took a deep breath and said, "You weren't concerned about family when you left me alone, pregnant and in danger. You weren't concerned about family when you stole my savings. You weren't concerned about family when you called me a loser." Linda began to protest, but I interrupted her. "I'm sorry you're in this situation, Linda, but I'm not responsible for the choices you, Mark, and Tom made. My priority is my children, and I won't expose them to the chaos you've created." After immediately blocking her number, I sat down and felt a weight rise off my shoulders. It was truly done.